Hello, I'm Maryam Moshiri. You're watching The Context on BBC News.
I remain gravely concerned by the impact of the ongoing hostilities on the humanitarian situation in Gaza. The current conditions are making it impossible for meaningful humanitarian operations to be conducted.
So a ceasefire stops the bombardment, but a ceasefire also enables aid workers to get that aid in. Right now, we are not even close to that, not even a fraction of the food, water, medicine that is needed.
Israel is ready for another humanitarian pause and additional humanitarian aid in order to enable the release of hostages.
Delayed and delayed again. This time last night, the UN Security Council was set to vote on a new resolution calling for a pause in the fighting in Gaza. 24 hours later, it still hasn't come as negotiators desperately try to agree on wording that will avoid another US veto. Well, we'll get reaction from one of the UN teams that have been working inside Gaza about how vital a pause in fighting is for aid groups to continue their operations in the Strip. Also tonight, we'll be live in Iceland, where there's been a dramatic volcanic eruption. And after having his requests for more military funding blocked in Washington and Brussels, President Zelensky has told the Ukrainian people he's confident they will win the war, calling for 500,000 more Ukrainians to join the army. Negotiators in the United Nations Security Council have spent the day trying to come up to an agreement over the wording of a resolution calling for a humanitarian pause in fighting in Gaza. They've delayed the vote multiple times in the last 24 hours to try and come to an agreement that will avoid a US veto. Well, a vote is now expected in perhaps around about 2 hours' time. Now, remember, the US was the only country to vote against the last Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire. We've heard from the State Department in the last hour or so. In a statement, they said the US would welcome resolution that supports addressing humanitarian needs of Gaza, but the details of any resolution matter a lot. Around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News. Well, let's take a look at some other stories making headlines now. The Scottish Government has announced a new 45% ban of tax for people earning over £75,000, meaning higher earners in Scotland will be paying more income tax. The top rate, which is paid by those earning more than £125,000, will also rise to 48%. The Housing Secretary announces a pledge to intervene if there have been delays to house building as a result of poor performance among planning teams. Michael Gove says he will call out local authorities that are dragging their feet, in his words, when it comes to processing housing applications. A woman and her child were left shaken but unhurt when a car veered off the road and flipped on its side right in front of them. As you can see here in the video, the woman walks away. You can see there carrying her child. It happened in Solihull at about 4 p.m. on Saturday. She suffered cuts. The woman in the car suffered cuts. The force says an investigation is underway. You're live with me, Maryam Moshiri, watching The Context on BBC News. Well, there's been a dramatic volcano eruption in Iceland, which is sending lava spewing hundreds of metres into the sky. Let's take you straight to the live pictures. These are coming into us right now from southwestern Iceland as the volcano continues to spew jets of molten lava from a crack in the earth that's now apparently several kilometres long. Well, the area is a volcanic and seismic hotspot, not very far from the capital Reykjavik.
We can't necessarily say how long they're going to go for. And the volcanic system, a bit like turning a tap on and off, can wax and wane.
OK, well, listen, it's been so good to talk to you, Dougal. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on BBC News. Professor Dougal Jerram, thank you. I'm back in a few minutes' time with more context. Don't go anywhere. Hello, I'm Maryam Moshiri. You're watching The Context on BBC News. The traditional model of NHS dentistry with no upfront cost or at least a subsidised rate is gone for good. So warns a leading health think tank. Let's bring you some breaking news now here on The Context, and this is coming to us from our political correspondent Helen Catt, and it's a political breaking news story. Not good news for Rishi Sunak's government. He is set to face another by-election next year after voters in the constituency of Wellingborough in Northamptonshire chose to remove Peter Bone as their MP. Now, if you remember the story, Mr Bone was suspended from Parliament just last month for 6 weeks. That triggered a recall petition. It's all to do with investigation by the Parliamentary Behavioural Watchdog, which found that he had allegedly bullied a member of staff and indecently exposed himself on an overseas trip. Well, Mr Bone denies these allegations. He does, however, remain suspended by the Conservative Party. He won his seat back in 2005. He's retained it ever since. Back in 2019, he enjoyed a majority of 18,500. There was a recall petition of eligible voters. Over 13% of them voted to sign the petition. That's above the 10% threshold required for Mr Bone to lose his seat. So there will be a by-election. That'll be the 20th by-election, apparently, I'm told, to be held in this Parliament. So we'll have a bit more on that breaking news story a little bit later in the programme. Let's cross live now to our sports centre now, and Catherine has the sport. Catherine.
Hi Maryam, thanks very much. The Nottingham Forest manager Steve Cooper has been living on thin ice with just one win in the last 3 months. They'd been difficult to beat at home this season, but not in recent weeks. And defeat to Tottenham at the City Ground last Friday night proved to be Cooper's last game in charge. The former Wolves and Spurs manager Nuno Espirito Santo has been in talks with the club, and his appointment is expected to be confirmed shortly. Colin Hazelden reports. And that is all the sport for now. Back to you, Maryam.
Catherine, thank you very much indeed. I have some breaking news for you just coming into us in the last few minutes. We've been talking to you about that potential UN resolution, the Gaza draft put forward by the UAE for the Security Council to vote on to allow some sort of cessation to hostilities, to allow humanitarian aid. Well, the delay has continued. We started telling you how it had been delayed from yesterday. Well, it's now delayed until Wednesday, 4 o'clock in the afternoon GMT. That's 11 a.m. New York time. That's after the meeting between the councils. So we're still waiting to hear exactly what the story is behind this delay, but the news is that we're not going to get a vote on this resolution to halt hostilities in Gaza until at least tomorrow. There's been pretty intense discussion, hasn't there, over the wording of the draft resolution. Members of the council wanting to avoid any chance of it being vetoed. Something similar has, of course, been vetoed already by the US because of the language that it contains. So language all important here around the world and across the UK. You're watching BBC News.
BBC News, bringing you different stories from across the UK. For more stories from across the UK, head to the BBC News website.
You're live with BBC News. Let's bring you some breaking news now from France. The ex-wife of a serial killer in France has just been sentenced to life in prison for her part in 2 murders and a kidnapping. 75-year-old Monique Olivier had been on trial for her involvement in the rape and murder of 20-year-old Joanna Parish in 1990 and 18-year-old Marie-Angèle Domès in 1988. Now, Olivier was also accused of helping to kidnap 9-year-old Estelle Mouzin in 2003. Estelle's body was never recovered. So just to bring you that big breaking story from France, she has been found guilty of that offence, guilty of her part in 2 murders and a kidnapping. We, of course, will bring you more on that story as and when we get it here on BBC News. Now, before we go, let's take you live to Iceland, because these pictures are coming into us right now from the volcanic eruption that we've been talking about here on BBC News. Now, this eruption has been predicted by scientists. They've been watching this volcano, I think, for about 3 or 4 months, but it doesn't take away from the fact that these are absolutely incredible pictures. Now, the area around the volcano has obviously been very much evacuated, but there are fears tonight of potential gas pollution hitting Iceland's capital because of the gas emitted by the volcano. Now, in the last half an hour or so, I talked to you a little bit about, or I talked to a professor, a volcanologist, about the 2010 volcanic eruption. Now, some of you may not remember it. I've had a few tweets from people on X, formerly known as Twitter, asking me about that eruption. Back in 2010, there was a huge volcanic eruption in Iceland. Another volcano, I'm not going to pronounce the name of the volcano because I don't want to go viral again, but the explosion caused ash particles to be pushed up into the atmosphere. They spread across Western Europe and many flights. In fact, I think all flights were cancelled for a period of time. This explosion is a lot less serious than that, so our volcanologist. It always makes me think of Star Trek when I say volcanologist, but anyway. Don't at me, okay? Our volcanologists were very clear. This is not as serious. There's no, danger to life, but the pictures are absolutely amazing. And we're going to leave you with these pictures as we end this hour on The Context on BBC News. You, of course, can read a lot more about the 2010 volcanic explosion and indeed this one on the BBC's website or the BBC's News app from wherever you are in the world. But for now, why don't we all just watch Iceland? Hello everyone, I'm Maryam Moshiri and you are watching The Context on BBC News. An hour and a half before we were all expecting that much delayed UN Security Council vote on a new resolution calling for a pause in the fighting in Gaza, that vote was delayed again until tomorrow, Wednesday, to allow negotiations to continue. We'll be live at the UN to hear why. Also coming up, Rishi Sunak gets one final grilling from senior MPs before Christmas as he answers questions from the liaison committee on issues including Israel and his Rwanda scheme. President Zelensky tells the Ukrainian people that he's confident they will win the war despite not getting more military funding and calls for 500,000 more Ukrainians to join the army. On the panel tonight to discuss all of this is Jack Blanchard, who's the UK editor of Politico, and Esther Brimmer, who's a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and has previously worked at the US Department of State. Thank you both. Well, negotiators in the United Nations Security Council have spent the day trying to come to an agreement over the wording of a resolution calling for a humanitarian pause in fighting in Gaza. They have delayed the vote multiple times in the last 24 hours to try to get to some sort of agreement that would avoid a US veto. In the last hour, we've heard they've delayed it yet again until tomorrow. Now remember, the United States was the only country to vote against the last Security Council resolution, which called for a ceasefire. We've heard from the State Department in the last hour or so. In a statement, they said the US would welcome a resolution that supports addressing humanitarian needs of Gaza, but the details of any resolution do matter. OK, Jack, thank you very much for that. Around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making news in the UK. The Scottish Government has announced a new 45% ban for people earning over £75,000, meaning higher earners in Scotland will be paying more income tax. The top rate, which is paid by those earning more than £125,000, will also rise to 48%. The Housing Secretary has announced a pledge to intervene if there have been delays to house building as a result of poor performance among planning teams. Michael Gove says that he'll call out local authorities that are dragging their feet when it comes to processing housing applications. An independent energy think tank estimates that £40 will be added to the average UK household's electricity bill this year alone because of the grid's inability to handle extra wind power. Carbon Tracker says that turbines must be switched off if it's too windy to avoid overloading the grid, and the costs involved are then passed on to the public. You're watching BBC News. This is The Context with me, Maryam Moshiri, on BBC News. Ukraine's President Zelensky has called for the mobilisation of 500,000 more troops in the fight to push back Russia's invasion of his country. Speaking during his end-of-year address, he said that Ukraine's counter-offensive has stopped Moscow from making any military advances at all in 2023. But he also said that without extra support from allies in both Washington and Brussels, it would be impossible to say when the war with Russia would end. Jack and Esther, thank you very much, both of you. Back in a few minutes with both of you. Let's go, just very briefly, if we can, take you back to Iceland. These pictures are absolutely incredible, are they not? They're spectacular pictures of the eruption, the volcano which has erupted in the last 24 hours. There have been weeks of intense earthquake activity culminating in this eruption. There are worries, however, tonight of some gas moving its way towards the Icelandic capital Reykjavik. But for now, we'll leave you with these pictures and we'll be back in a few minutes' time on The Context on BBC News. Hello, I'm Maryam Moshiri and you are watching The Context on BBC News. A gas pollution warning for Reykjavik after a spectacular volcano eruption in southwest Iceland. We'll have more on the Icelandic volcano eruption very shortly in the programme. We'll probably take you back to those amazing live pictures as well. Before the break, we talked about the challenges faced by Ukraine in its war with Russia. In the meantime, President Putin has said attempts to inflict defeat on Russia had crumbled. He also suggested he would be prepared to talk to Western leaders about Ukraine, but would defend Moscow's national interests. Our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg, reports now from Moscow.
No. Is Nat King Cole? No. The Christmas song, Chestnuts roasting on an open fire?
No, that's a good one. No, it's White Christmas. I'm dreaming of a White Christmas.
Of course, Bing Crosby.
And that is a beautiful song, right? That is also a classic. That is also a classic. Anyway, I'm sorry we couldn't play all these songs for you, or indeed that I didn't get my panellists to sing them. Maybe next time we will ask them to do that. Across the UK and around the world. Did I say that right? Probably not. This is BBC News.
Bringing you different stories from across the UK. For more stories from across the UK, head to the BBC News website.
You're live with me, Maryam Moshiri, watching The Context on BBC News. Now, I want to show you some extraordinary pictures where a mother and child had the most incredible lucky escape. No one was hurt here, properly hurt, on Saturday afternoon. Take a look at this. There's a car and neither mother nor child were hurt in this incredible crash in Solihull. The woman driving the car did suffer a few cuts and bruises, but absolutely incredible scene there of that car. How awful that must have been to see that car veering towards you when you're pushing your baby in a pram. I don't know if you can see there the mother and baby with the baby in her arms walking away just behind where the car is. Everyone was okay. Now it is time for the panel. I did that annoying thing with my voice where I went, time for the panel. It's just, I can't help it. It's so game showy. I just feel like you need to fight it out for something. But this is the time where the panel tell us the fascinating, interesting story that they have seen in the news that they'd like to talk about. And Jack, we will start with you. You've spotted a fascinating story on the BBC website about a 2,000-year-old skeleton. And this is a good news story, right? Because that's what I like at the end of my shows.
And while we really worry about what's going on in low Earth orbit, because those are where the satellites that make such programs as this possible orbit. So it's great stuff.
Esther, it is great stuff. I love a good cat video. I love a skeleton. I love everything about both of you. Thank you, both of you, for joining us on the panel tonight. And thank you to viewers at home for watching. Bye-bye from me.
Hello from the BBC Sports Centre, I'm Catherine Downs. Manchester City beat Urawa Red Diamonds to set up a meeting with South American champions Fluminense in the final of the Club World Cup on Friday.